The prosecutor demanded 10 years in prison for my disabled daughter Emma, claiming she attacked an HOA gatehouse with her wheelchair. Margaret Richardson, the HOA president, smiled coldly as she testified against my child. She had no idea I was the U.S. Attorney General. Big mistake. Before watching the full story, comment below where you are watching from. Also, like and subscribe for more stories. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night. As the U.S. Attorney General, I was used to late-night calls about national emergencies, terrorist threats, or political crisis. But this call was not about national security. It was about my daughter. Dad. Emma's voice was shaking with fear and tears. I need help. Something terrible happened. I sat up in bed immediately, my heart racing. Emma, what's wrong? Are you hurt? I'm in jail, Dad. They arrested me tonight. The HOA president, Mrs. Richardson. She pressed charges. They're saying I could go to prison for 10 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. My 22-year-old daughter, Emma, had been born with cerebral palsy. She used a wheelchair and had some difficulty speaking, but she was brilliant, kind, and studying environmental science at the local university. The idea of her in jail was impossible to believe. Emma, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. Through her tears, she explained the events of the evening. It started 3 months ago when Emma had moved into her first apartment in Sunset Valley, an upscale gated community with strict HOA rules. She had saved money from her part-time job and student loans to afford the small one-bedroom unit, wanting to live independently for the first time. Mrs. Richardson has been making my life hell since day one, Emma said. She complains about everything. My wheelchair ramp, my handicap parking spot, even the way I park my car. Tonight, she called the police and had me arrested. Arrested for what? I asked, already feeling my protective instincts kicking in. She's saying I threatened her and damaged HOA property. But Dad, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to get to my apartment. I told Emma I would be there within the hour and immediately called my driver. As we rushed through the empty streets toward the county jail, Emma's lawyer called with more details. Mr. Attorney General, this is a very serious situation, Attorney Martinez said. Mrs. Richardson is claiming that your daughter threatened her with violence and vandalized the community gatehouse. She's pushing for maximum penalties, up to 10 years in prison for aggravated assault and destruction of property. That's impossible, I said. Emma wouldn't hurt a fly. She's never been violent in her life. I believe you, sir, but Mrs. Richardson has witness statements and claims there's video evidence. The local prosecutor seems eager to move forward with the case. When I arrived at the jail, I was shocked by what I saw. Emma was in her wheelchair in a holding cell, still wearing the clothes she had on when arrested, a simple sweater and jeans. Her face was red from crying, and she looked smaller and more vulnerable than I had seen her since she was a child. Dad, she said when she saw me, reaching through the bars. I'm so scared. I held her hand through the bars, trying to stay calm despite the rage building inside me. Tell me everything that happened tonight, sweetheart. Every detail. Emma took a shaky breath and began her story. I was coming home from my evening class around 8 p.m. As usual, I had to use the handicap entrance to the community because it's the only one with wheelchair access. Mrs. Richardson was waiting for me at the gatehouse. Margaret Richardson was the HOA president of Sunset Valley, a woman in her 50s who took community rules very seriously. Emma had mentioned her before, always complaining, always finding problems with everything Emma did. She started yelling at me the moment I approached the gate, Emma continued. She said I was violating community rules by using the handicap entrance after 6 p.m. She claimed it was only for daytime use. I felt my anger rising. That's ridiculous. Handicap access can't have time restrictions. I tried to explain that to her, Dad. I showed her the federal disability laws on my phone, but she got even angrier. She said I was being disrespectful and that disabled people shouldn't expect special treatment. Emma's voice broke as she continued. She blocked my path with her body, standing right in front of my wheelchair. I couldn't get through. I asked her politely to move, but she refused. She said I needed to go around to the main entrance. The main entrance has stairs, doesn't it? Yes, Dad. I can't use stairs. I explained that to her, but she said that wasn't her problem. She said if I wanted to live in a normal community, I needed to follow normal rules. I felt sick listening to this. The cruelty was unbelievable. So what happened next? I tried to go around her, my wheelchair moving very slowly, but the gate mechanism got caught on my wheel. When I tried to free it, the whole gatehouse shook a little. It's an old wooden structure, and it's not very stable. Emma paused, wiping tears from her eyes. Mrs. Richardson started screaming that I was destroying community property. She said I was attacking the gatehouse on purpose. Then she called the police. What about the threat she claims you made? Emma looked confused. I never threatened her, Dad. When she kept blocking my path, I got frustrated and said, please just let me go home. You don't want to make this a bigger problem. I meant legally, like filing a disability discrimination complaint. But she told the police I threatened her with violence. The story was becoming clearer, and it made me furious. Margaret Richardson had harassed a disabled young woman, blocked her access to her own home, and then twisted the situation to make Emma look like the aggressor. Emma, I promise you, we're going to fight this. This is disability discrimination, and it's illegal. But even as I said it, I knew the situation was more complicated than it should be. Emma was facing serious criminal charges, and the local prosecutor seemed determined to pursue them. The next morning, I met with Emma's lawyer to discuss strategy. Attorney Martinez had reviewed the police report and the prosecutor's evidence. The situation is troubling, she said. Mrs. Richardson has 3 witness statements from neighbors who claimed they saw Emma aggressively approach the gatehouse and deliberately damage it. The prosecutor is treating this as a case of a disabled person using their condition to manipulate situations. That's absurd, I said. Emma has never manipulated anything in her life. I agree, but we're dealing with some serious bias here. Mrs. Richardson has painted herself as a victim of disability fraud, claiming that Emma uses her wheelchair to get away with breaking rules and threatening people. I realized this case was about more than just Emma. It was about how society treats disabled people, especially when they assert their rights. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. I wanted to use my position as Attorney General to intervene, but I knew that could backfire. If it looked like I was using my power to protect my daughter from legitimate charges, it could hurt both Emma's case and my career. Instead, I decided to attend the hearing as Emma's father, not as a government official. As I prepared for the hearing, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma's journey. From the day she was born, she had faced challenges that most people couldn't imagine. The doctors told us she might never walk, never speak clearly, never live independently. But Emma proved them all wrong. Throughout school, Emma fought for her place. She fought for access to classrooms, fought for accommodations, fought to be included in activities. Every single day was a battle. When she got accepted to university, I cried tears of joy. She had worked twice as hard as every other student, studying late into the night, never making excuses, never giving up. Moving into her own apartment was supposed to be her moment of independence. She was so excited the day she got the keys to her place in Sunset Valley. And then Margaret Richardson destroyed that dream. During my research before the hearing, I discovered something shocking. Emma wasn't the first disabled person Margaret Richardson had targeted. There was Michael Chen, a veteran who lost his leg in Afghanistan. Richardson complained about his service dog, claiming it was too loud. She tried to ban the dog from common areas. There was Sarah Williams, a blind woman who used a white cane. Richardson complained that her cane scratched the sidewalks and demanded she pay for repairs. There was David Martinez, who had autism. Richardson complained about his antisocial behavior and tried to force him to attend community meetings. Each of these people had suffered in silence, afraid to speak up, afraid to fight back. Richardson had created an environment of fear and intimidation. The pattern was clear. Margaret Richardson was systematically trying to remove disabled residents from the community. She wanted a perfect neighborhood where everyone looked the same and nobody challenged her authority. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread through the community, with people taking strong positions on both sides. Some supported Emma and saw the charges as disability discrimination. Others supported Mrs. Richardson and believed that disabled people shouldn't get special treatment. Margaret Richardson took the stand first. She was a thin, sharp-faced woman with gray hair pulled back tightly. She wore a conservative business suit and spoke with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. "Your Honor," she began, "I have been HOA president of Sunset Valley for 8 years. We maintain the highest community standards, and our property values reflect that commitment." The prosecutor asked her to describe the night of the incident. "I was conducting my regular evening security check when I saw Miss Morgan approaching the handicap gate after hours," Mrs. Richardson said. "Our community rules clearly state that the handicap entrance is for daytime use only, between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Did you inform Miss Morgan of this rule?" "Yes, I did. I politely explained that she needed to use the main entrance like everyone else. I had to grip the bench to keep from standing up." Nothing about Margaret Richardson's behavior had been polite. What was Miss Morgan's response? She became immediately hostile and aggressive. She started waving her phone at me, claiming that federal law gave her the right to ignore our community rules. When I stood my ground, she threatened me. What exactly did she say? Margaret Richardson looked directly at Emma, her eyes cold. She said, "You don't want to make this a bigger problem." The threat was clear. What happened next? She deliberately rammed her wheelchair into our gatehouse structure, causing damage. It was clearly an act of retaliation for my enforcing community rules. The prosecutor showed photos of the gatehouse, which had a small crack in one wooden post. To hear Mrs. Richardson tell it, Emma had practically demolished the building. When it was time for cross-examination, Emma's lawyer stood up with determination. "Mrs. Richardson, you testified that the handicap entrance has time restrictions. Can you show me where that rule is written in your HOA bylaws?" Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "It's an understood policy." Understood by whom? Was Miss Morgan ever given a copy of this policy? All residents are expected to understand reasonable community standards. That's not what I asked. Do you have any written document that tells residents the handicap entrance has time restrictions? Well, no, but... Mrs. Richardson, are you aware that federal disability law requires that handicap access be available at all times? Our community rules supersede federal suggestions. The lawyer paused, letting that statement hang in the air. Did you just say that HOA rules supersede federal law? I said our community has standards. Standards that discriminate against disabled residents. The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. Margaret Richardson was revealing her true attitude toward disability rights. "Mrs. Richardson, you testified that Miss Morgan threatened you. Isn't it true that she was simply trying to explain her legal rights? She was being aggressive and disrespectful." "Disrespectful how?" "By asserting her right to access her own home." Margaret's face flushed with anger. Miss Morgan thinks her wheelchair gives her the right to ignore rules that apply to everyone else. So you believe disabled people should follow the same rules as non-disabled people, even when those rules make it impossible for them to access their homes? I believe everyone should be treated equally. Even when equal treatment creates unequal results. Margaret Richardson looked confused by the question, which perfectly illustrated the problem. She couldn't understand the difference between equal treatment and equitable treatment. When Emma took the stand, the difference was night and day. She spoke quietly but clearly, explaining how she had tried to de-escalate the situation. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble," Emma said. "I just wanted to go home. I've lived in Sunset Valley for 3 months, and I've never had any problems except with Mrs. Richardson." "Can you describe your interactions with Mrs. Richardson since moving to the community?" "She's complained about everything I do. My wheelchair ramp is unsightly. My handicap parking spot takes up too much space. The way I park is sloppy. She's even complained about the sound my wheelchair makes on the sidewalk." "How did that make you feel?" Emma's voice got quiet. "Like I didn't belong. Like I was some kind of problem that needed to be solved." "On the night of the incident, what was your intent when you approached the gatehouse?" "I just wanted to get home. I was tired from class and I had a paper to write. When Mrs. Richardson blocked my path, I tried to be polite, but she wouldn't listen to reason." "Did you threaten her in any way?" "No, absolutely not. I've never threatened anyone in my life. When I said she didn't want to make it a bigger problem, I meant filing a discrimination complaint. I was trying to avoid conflict, not create it." "What happened when your wheelchair touched the gatehouse?" Emma looked embarrassed. "It was an accident. The gate mechanism caught on my wheel and when I tried to free it, the structure moved a little. I immediately apologized and asked if there was any damage." "How did Mrs. Richardson respond?" "She started screaming that I had attacked the gatehouse on purpose. She said I was using my disability as an excuse to destroy property. Then she called the police." When Emma finished testifying, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Her honesty and vulnerability had exposed the cruelty of the charges against her. But the case took an unexpected turn when the prosecutor stood to make his closing argument. "Your Honor," District Attorney Williams said, "this case represents a dangerous trend. We're seeing more and more people use disability claims to avoid responsibility for their actions. Miss Morgan may have a physical disability, but that doesn't give her the right to threaten community leaders or destroy property." I felt sick listening to this. The prosecutor was using Emma's case to make a political point about disability rights. "In my opinion, a lenient sentence would tell every disabled person in this county that they can break the law and claim discrimination as a defense. We need to show that disability doesn't mean immunity from consequences. I'm asking for the maximum sentence of 10 years in prison." The judge looked troubled by this line of argument. "Mr. Williams, are you suggesting that disability rights are somehow fake?" "I'm suggesting that some people fake disability issues to get special treatment, Your Honor." That's when I couldn't stay silent anymore. I stood up in the courtroom, and my voice carried the authority of my position. "Your Honor, I am Robert Morgan, United States Attorney General, and I am also Emma Morgan's father." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Margaret Richardson went pale. D.A. Williams looked like he might faint. "I have listened to these proceedings with growing disgust," I continued. "What I've heard today is not justice. It's persecution of a disabled young woman for the crime of trying to access her own home." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Morgan, while I respect your position, you cannot address the court without." "Your Honor, I'm not speaking as Attorney General. I'm speaking as the father of a disabled child who has been criminally charged for asserting her basic civil rights." I turned to face Margaret Richardson directly. "Mrs. Richardson, you have discriminated against my daughter from the day she moved into your community. You have harassed her, blocked her access, and then twisted the situation to make her look like a criminal." Margaret Richardson found her voice. I was just enforcing community rules. I didn't know who she was." "It shouldn't matter who she is," I said firmly. "Every disabled person deserves the same rights and respect. But since you seem to care about who people are, let me introduce myself properly." I pulled out my phone and called my chief of staff. "Sarah, I need you to contact the Civil Rights Division immediately. I want a full investigation into disability discrimination in Sunset Valley HOA. Also, contact the FBI. I want to know if there are any federal crimes being committed here. Margaret Richardson's face went from pale to white. Mr. Attorney General, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right. You misunderstood federal disability law. You misunderstood civil rights. And you misunderstood what happens when you mess with my daughter. D.A. Williams tried to salvage the situation. Sir, with all due respect, we were just. You were just what? Building your political career by prosecuting disabled people. Using my daughter as an example to show how tough you are on crime. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I formally request that all charges against my daughter be dropped immediately. This prosecution is based on disability discrimination and violates her civil rights under federal law. The judge looked at D.A. Williams. Mr. Williams, in light of this new information, how do you wish to proceed? Williams was sweating now. Your Honor, perhaps we should reconsider the charges. Perhaps you should, the judge said dryly. In fact, I'm dismissing all charges against Miss Morgan immediately. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full review of this prosecution to determine if any ethical violations occurred. Margaret Richardson stood up desperately. Wait, this isn't fair. She can't just use her father's position to get out of trouble. I walked over to where she was sitting. Mrs. Richardson, Emma didn't use my position. You created this situation through your own bigotry and cruelty. If you had treated my daughter with basic human decency, none of this would have happened. But the rules. Your rules violate federal law. Your discrimination violates federal law. And your harassment of disabled residents violates federal law. I suggest you get a very good lawyer. Over the following weeks, the federal investigation into Sunset Valley HOA revealed a pattern of disability discrimination. Margaret Richardson had systematically harassed multiple disabled residents, trying to force them out of the community. The Department of Justice filed a federal lawsuit against the HOA and Margaret Richardson personally. The community was forced to pay significant damages to all affected residents and implement comprehensive disability access policies. Margaret Richardson was removed as HOA president and faced personal liability for her discriminatory actions. Several other residents came forward with stories of her harassment, painting a picture of systematic cruelty toward anyone she deemed undesirable. D.A. Williams also faced consequences. The state bar opened an investigation into his prosecution of Emma, and he was ultimately censured for using his office to promote discriminatory policies. The FBI investigation revealed shocking details about Richardson's operation. She had kept detailed files on every disabled resident in Sunset Valley, documenting their movements, their visitors, their daily routines. In her files, we found notes like, wheelchair resident Emma Morgan, loud equipment, unsightly ramp, needs to be removed. Another file read, blind resident Sarah Williams, dangerous with cane, liability issue, fine violation to evict. She had been planning to systematically remove disabled residents from the community. Her strategy was simple, make their lives so miserable that they would leave voluntarily. The investigation also revealed that Richardson had connections with the local prosecutor's office. D.A. Williams had received campaign donations from Richardson and other HOA board members. The federal charges against Richardson were serious. She faced violations of the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and multiple counts of civil rights violations. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Richardson was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation. The HOA was fined $2 million, which was distributed among the victims. The organization was also required to implement comprehensive disability rights training. Emma's ordeal changed her in profound ways. She had always been passionate about environmental justice, but now she understood that justice comes in many forms. She started a blog documenting her experience and providing resources for other disabled people facing discrimination. Within months, her blog had thousands of followers. Dad, she told me one evening, I used to think my disability was my biggest challenge. Now I realize it's not the disability. It's the discrimination. It's people like Margaret Richardson who see us as problems instead of people. Emma began speaking at universities and community centers. She talked about her experience with eloquence and passion. She explained how discrimination works and how it hides behind seemingly neutral rules. She became particularly passionate about educating people on the difference between equality and equity. Equality means treating everyone the same, she would explain. Equity means giving everyone what they need to succeed. Her speeches were powerful because they came from lived experience. She spoke as someone who had faced discrimination and survived. Sunset Valley underwent a remarkable transformation after Richardson's removal. The new HOA board, led by David Martinez, one of Richardson's former victims, implemented sweeping changes. They installed additional wheelchair ramps, improved lighting for residents with vision impairments, and created quiet zones for residents with sensory sensitivities. They hired a disability rights consultant to review all community policies and remove any discriminatory provisions. But more importantly, they changed the culture of the community. They organized events celebrating diversity and inclusion. They created a community garden where residents of all abilities could participate. They established a mentorship program connecting younger disabled residents with older residents who could share their experiences and wisdom. The property values, which Richardson had been so obsessed with protecting, actually increased. It turned out that inclusive communities are more desirable than exclusive ones. Families with disabled members actively sought out Sunset Valley because of its reputation for accessibility and inclusion. Emma became friends with many of her neighbors, people who had been silent during her ordeal but who now apologized and explained that they had been afraid of Richardson. They told stories of how Richardson had ruled through fear, threatening anyone who challenged her with fines, violations, or worse. "I wish we had stood up for you," one neighbor told Emma. "We knew what she was doing was wrong, but we were cowards. You were brave, and you paid the price for our cowardice." Emma forgave them. She understood that standing up to bullies is hard, especially when those bullies have power. Her experience had taught her that change often comes from the most unexpected places, and that courage is contagious. Once one person stands up, others find the strength to stand as well. But the most important outcome was Emma's reaction to everything that happened. "Dad," she said to me a few weeks after the charges were dropped, "I've been thinking about what Mrs. Richardson said about disabled people expecting special treatment. What about it? She was right in a way. I do expect special treatment. I expect to be treated like a human being with rights and dignity. If that's special treatment, then maybe the problem isn't with disabled people. Maybe the problem is that basic human decency has become special." Emma's case became a landmark in disability rights law. The Justice Department used it as a model for prosecuting housing discrimination against disabled people. Emma was invited to speak at conferences and universities about her experience. She graduated with honors in environmental science and now works for the EPA, investigating environmental discrimination against vulnerable communities. She still lives in Sunset Valley, where the new HOA board treats all residents with respect and dignity. Margaret Richardson moved away from the community after the lawsuit. I heard she went to live with relatives in another state, where hopefully she learned something about compassion and human rights. But I doubt it. This experience changed me as much as it changed Emma. As Attorney General, I had prosecuted countless cases of discrimination and civil rights violations. But I had never truly understood what discrimination feels like until I saw my daughter suffer through it. After Emma's case, I made disability rights a central focus of my work as Attorney General. I established a special task force dedicated to investigating discrimination against disabled people in housing, employment, and public accommodations. I also became more involved in disability advocacy on a personal level. I attended rallies, spoke at events, and met with disability rights organizations. Emma taught me to see barriers, to recognize discrimination even when it hides behind polite language and neutral policies. She taught me that fighting for justice isn't just about prosecuting criminals. It's about changing hearts and minds, about building a society where everyone belongs. Emma's case had ripple effects far beyond Sunset Valley. Within 6 months of her trial, the Department of Justice received over 500 complaints about HOA discrimination against disabled residents. Emma's courage inspired them to speak up. They saw that justice was possible, that powerful institutions could be held accountable. We prosecuted more than 50 cases in the following year. We won significant settlements and forced systemic changes in housing practices across the country. Emma received thousands of letters and emails from people thanking her for her bravery. Parents of disabled children wrote to say her story gave them hope. Disabled adults wrote to say her example inspired them to fight back against discrimination. One letter particularly moved me. It was from a young man named James who used a wheelchair and had faced discrimination from his HOA. After hearing Emma's story, he decided to file a complaint with the Department of Justice. "Your daughter showed me that I have rights worth defending," he wrote. "Thank you for raising such a remarkable person." Emma's case sparked a national conversation about disability rights and discrimination. Major news outlets covered the story, and politicians began proposing new legislation to strengthen protections for disabled people. I was invited to testify before Congress about the need for stronger enforcement of disability rights laws. I brought Emma with me, and she testified about her experience with such eloquence and power that several representatives were moved to tears. Disability discrimination isn't just a legal issue, Emma told Congress. It's a moral issue. When we build communities that exclude disabled people, we're saying that some lives matter less than others. Her testimony went viral on social media. Millions of people watched the video and discussed the issues she raised. Several states passed new laws strengthening protections for disabled people in housing. HOAs across the country reviewed their policies and removed discriminatory provisions. Emma's case became a case study in law schools, used to teach future lawyers about disability rights and civil rights enforcement. The real lesson from Emma's case isn't about my power as Attorney General. It's about what happens when ordinary people stand up to discrimination and cruelty. Emma could have backed down when Margaret Richardson harassed her. She could have moved away quietly. Instead, she stood her ground and fought for her rights. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by the most vulnerable people. And sometimes those battles change the world for everyone. Emma taught me that being disabled doesn't make someone weak. It makes them strong enough to face a world that too often sees them as problems to be solved rather than people to be valued. And Margaret Richardson? She learned that federal law isn't just a suggestion. Disability rights aren't negotiable. And sometimes the person you're discriminating against has a father who can do something about it. In the end, justice was served not because of who I am, but because of who Emma is. A brave, strong young woman who refused to be intimidated by bullies and bigots. And that's the real story worth telling. 5 years have passed since that terrible night when Emma called me from jail. So much has changed. Emma is now 27 years old and has become one of the leading voices in disability rights advocacy. She published a book titled Rolling Forward, A Journey Through Disability Rights and Justice, which became a bestseller. She married her college sweetheart, Marcus, who stood by her throughout the entire ordeal. They live in a beautiful, fully accessible home in Sunset Valley. Emma refused to let Richardson's hatred drive her away. She and Marcus are now expecting their first child. "I want to raise my child in a world where disability is seen as natural human diversity," she told me recently. Margaret Richardson served 3 years of her 5-year sentence before being released on parole. She lives quietly in a small town in Montana. She never publicly apologized for what she did. D.A. Williams lost his re-election campaign after the ethics violations came to light. He now works as a defense attorney in private practice. The other victims of Richardson's discrimination have also moved forward. Michael Chen became an advocate for disabled veterans. Sarah Williams started a consulting business helping organizations become more accessible. David Martinez serves on the new Sunset Valley HOA board. As for me, I stepped down as Attorney General after 3 more years and now run a non-profit organization that provides legal support to disabled people facing discrimination. Emma's case established important legal precedents that continue to protect disabled people today. Courts now cite Morgan v. Sunset Valley HOA when ruling on disability discrimination cases. Law schools use Emma's case to teach about disability rights and housing law. Medical schools use it to teach future doctors about the social barriers disabled people face. But beyond the legal impact, Emma's story has touched millions of lives on a personal level. I receive messages regularly from people who say that hearing about Emma's courage helped them find their own courage. Each of these acts of courage, inspired by Emma's example, creates ripples that spread outward, touching more lives, changing more hearts, building a more just society. As I write this, I'm sitting in Emma's EPA office, watching her prepare for a presentation on environmental justice and disability rights. She speaks with authority, passion, and expertise. She's no longer the frightened young woman crying in a jail cell. She's a powerful advocate, a respected expert, a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. I think about that night 5 years ago when the phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I think about the fear I felt, the rage, the determination to protect my daughter. But mostly, I think about Emma's strength. She didn't need me to save her. She was already saving herself, standing up for her rights, refusing to be silenced. My power as Attorney General simply amplified her voice, but the courage was all Emma. Margaret Richardson thought she could break Emma. She thought a disabled young woman would be an easy target. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea that Emma Morgan was a force of nature, a warrior for justice, a woman who would change the world. And she definitely had no idea that Emma's father was the Attorney General. But in the end, that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was Emma's courage and her refusal to accept injustice. That's the real power. Not the power of position, but the power of truth, of justice, of one brave person standing up and saying, "No more." That's Emma's legacy. And I couldn't be more proud to be her father.